Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. We had snow here a few days ago and that rather flattened the writing garden where the daffodil Thalia is just coming up to its best. And you know, when you're making a white garden, the secret is to have lots of green and lots of different shades of green. Now, there is one plant here which has done its flowering for the year. And for the rest of the year, it will just be green. And this is the winter honeysuckle, Lonicera fragrantissima. Now, I love it. Tiny little flowers that have the most fabulous fragrance. But it does need pruning because it can get very ungainly and straggly. Now, one of the problems of getting in with all these plants is not doing too much collateral damage. The best way of pruning a shrub like this, which is sprawling and slightly untidy, is to get right down into the base and take out one or two of the older, larger stems. Mind out, Patty. I'm going to throw this on the ground. That will encourage new growth to come up, and it's the new growth that will carry next year's flowers. So if you've got any early flowering shrubs that have finished flowering now is the time to prune them. Of course, once you start pruning, there's a kind of flush of excitement. You think, yeah, I'm in the game now. And you tend to go on. So it's a good idea to stop, stand back, have a look, maybe even come back to it another day before going mad. Now, coming up on today's programme, Joe discovers an Arcadian retreat in the heart of London.
It's about keeping the gaze in. So when you look onto your garden, you feel it's your paradise. It's what you kind of look forward to when you get home from work. It's what you look forward to when you wake up in the morning.
And we visit a Dorset grower who passes on her lifetime's expertise in raising superb chilli plants.
Here we have chilies from all over the world, and some of them are very hot, but if you want real heat, you have to come to Dorset.
And I shall be giving you a little masterclass on beans. You have been warned. A few weeks ago, I got out my dahlias, sorted them out as I do every year, and most of them I potted up, planted them fairly deep in the compost, and put them somewhere frost-free but with light so they could start to grow. But a handful I plant very shallowly, so the tubers are right near the surface, and by putting them on a heated surface, watering them really liberally, they've grown much faster. So after a few weeks, we've got some nice strong shoots, and this makes ideal cutting material. Now, if you take a cutting, you get almost a clone of the parent. So if you've got a favourite dahlia plant, the best way to propagate it is from cuttings. Now, I do need my glasses to do this because you need to get a sharp knife and get right down at the base of the shoot so you can feel where it joins the tuber, and then slice at an angle. And if you nick a bit of tuber off while you're about it, so much the better. So, in order for that to root, I want a really loose growing medium. In fact, I'm going to add a little bit more perlite to this mix. You could take the cutting in pure perlite, and that would work, because it doesn't need any nutrition. So if you mix lots of perlite, or grit, or vermiculite, with a peat-free growing medium, it should be ideal. Now, before I put that into the mixture, I'm going to take some of the leaves off, because you want to get a nice balance between a little bit of leaf, which will feed the growing roots, but not so much that will make demands on them. So I'll just take that one off too. Now, just ease it into the growing medium like that, and push it down without forcing it, because we don't want to damage it. And there we are. That is now ready to root. Now we'll label it. This is Tamburo. And I will now put that somewhere warm. I've got a heated bench, but if you don't have a heated mat, then a windowsill above a radiator will do well. Just two things to bear in mind is one, a south-facing window at this time of year is not a good idea because that can get too hot and can scorch it. Water it, don't let the compost dry out. And if you've got a mist sprayer, just mist the air around it, and that will do a lot to reduce water loss. And then when you start to see new leaves form, and that should happen in a couple of weeks' time, you know there are roots, and at that stage, it will need some nutrition, so that's when to pot it on. And taking dahlia cuttings is easy, they strike nearly every time, and a very good way to ensure that your favourite dahlia is replicated, and very soon you can build up a good supply. Now, last September, Joe went to visit a compact city garden that was filled with really big design ideas.
Imagine a garden with a copse of trees, woodland planting in the dapple shade beneath, the trickling of a water feature, and various places to sit. Sounds big, doesn't it? But here in West London, there's a garden which elegantly combines these features within a 10 by 7 metre city plot. The creative force behind this wonderful garden is designer Adolfo Harrison. Adolfo, it's a beautiful garden. You know, it feels like a haven right in the middle of the city. But what was your approach to the design?
Well, the approach was quite similar as other spaces that we've designed of a similar scale in the urban environment. And there are two things we always have to kind of ensure that we've covered properly. One is the sense of enclosure. It's not just about keeping the eyes of the neighbours out, but it's about keeping the gaze in. So when you look onto your garden, you feel it's your space, it's your paradise. It's what you kind of look forward to when you get home from work. It's what you look forward to when you wake up in the morning. And the second is making it feel as large as possible. First of all, we've stretched the garden. And so we've used these three sculptural objects. So we've got this coffee table here, water feature there. We have a pot over there that kind of leads you into this kind of hidden way into the pergola. And those are really kind of stretched into the corners.
Yeah, they're right on the boundary.
Yeah, it's really important.
Okay.
And it's quite a sort of a practical device that everybody can use. And then there's the other element that we've introduced, which is just as important, which is the illusion of more space. We just want the eye to continuously move around, never kind of focus on one spot in particular. So we've got the three trees laid in a triangle. But then even the planting has been laid in waves, so kind of directing you away from the symmetrical path. So your eye is always moving.
There's a lot in a small space, but it doesn't feel fussy in any way.
Yeah, I mean, climbers are obviously very useful in these gardens of this scale, because obviously they allow us to really bring in greenery, but they don't really take up too much space. When we arrived the first time, we saw this was essentially a living wall. It was, you know, the ferns that are in that wall are the ferns that were here when this was just full of rubble.
Right.
And so we borrowed that. Obviously, it spilled indoors to the living wall indoors, but it also spilled then onto the ground, so it kind of spreads. We're more interested in how the planting is kind of directing us around the garden and the atmosphere it's giving, rather than kind of showing off as many different varieties as possible.
Now, off to one side of the garden is this beautifully enclosed private space. It's fantastic. And this plant is really doing a job. There are these uprights covered in Trachelospermum jasminoide. It's a really well-known plant, the star jasmine. But a lot of climbers get quite messy, a lot of growth on top and none at the bottom. This is perfect for the job. And it separates this space off fantastically well. And look at this. There's just a really great dining space here, a bespoke table and a built-in bench. But one of the details, my favourite details in the whole garden, is cleverly Adolfo has just designed this shelving all the way round, which just houses a collection of succulent plants, but it works beautifully well. And that could be an ever-changing composition. You could put cut flowers in there, some larger plants, but it really creates that blurring of the interior and the exterior. And then when you sit down here, you get a wonderful peek through the columns of the pergola. It's so well designed, it all slots together absolutely perfectly. Adolfo has brought the plants right into the middle of this garden, and it creates a very naturalistic effect, a sort of semi-woodland effect in a way. And what I like is there's lots of ground cover perennials, but what I've just worked out is he doesn't have a mid-story of planting at all. There's no shrubs, there's no really tall perennials that are going to block the view, because he's trying to draw the eye into certain areas and keep that middle space open at eye level. Now, these trees, these 3 Amelanchiers, he's pruned beautifully so there's no foliage in the middle blocking the eye, but 3 are the same, creates this stylized woodland. And then you look down on the lower story here, and we've got things like these hart's tongue ferns, we've got the persicaria, but then in between he's planted Helxine, mind your own business, as a ground cover. Now that shows how confident and brave he is as a designer, because once you got this stuff, you ain't ever going to get rid of it, and it really greens up the soil beneath. And then that leads us back to the trigger of the whole woodland style planting to start with. There's the fern that was growing in the wall when he first saw this site, and it's still there. This is a space to explore and linger in. Sophisticated, atmospheric, yet practical, with some beautiful natural elements too. It's a garden that really feels part of a home. And best of all, when the sun sets, it just carries on inviting you in.
Two things struck me about that garden. The first was the way that it so cleverly used a limited palette of plants, of colour, and even of design. And the second thing was, when you're planning your garden and working out how to use it, just think of nighttime. And I love the way that that was lit. Now, I've had a lot of questions about beans and the right time to sow them, and should they be sowing French beans now, and is it too late for broad beans? So I thought I'd just do a rundown of beans. I've got a few broad beans left over that I actually sowed last autumn and I haven't planted out. And the great thing about broad beans is they are tough. These are really hardy plants, and you can sow them in October, November, you can sow them in February, but the key to broad beans is to grow them in cool weather in the first half of the year. However, French beans are completely different. These like heat, and the biggest mistake people make with French beans, whether they are climbing or dwarf, is that they sow them too early. I don't sow any direct until the end of May or well into June, and they will grow fast, and you can be harvesting them in 40 days. And of course, what we eat are the pods, and we call them haricots verts, green beans, French beans, but essentially they're immature beans. Now, this is one of my favorite varieties called Blauhilde, and it's a really good climbing bean. French beans, both climbing and dwarf, don't need a particularly rich soil, which is a good thing. Now, the same type of thing is Bolotti beans, but this one is grown entirely for the dried beans. We don't eat the pods of Bolotti beans, and that means you leave them on the plant and let the pods go brown and papery, and then gather them. And finally, we have runner beans. and get a train and go past any allotment in the country and you will see runner beans growing, because runner beans love our cool, damp English summer. These can be sown fairly soon, and if it's a hot, dry summer, do remember to water them well. Finally, if you want to grow beans and you don't have a garden, you're growing everything in containers, go for dwarf French beans, because they will fare a lot better in a pot than the others. Now, of course, all these beans are best grown outside in full sun, but we've been sent a film by Amy Shaw from Norfolk, who is growing something that is going to be much happier indoors wherever possible.
Hi, I'm Amy, and this is my vegetable patch in West Norfolk. So I wanted to talk you through how to grow your own loofah sponges. So I used to think that loofahs came from the sea, but in fact they're actually a type of gourd, and they are a member of the cucumber family. So you can grow your own homegrown, sustainable, plastic-free sponges. Loofah seeds can be quite difficult to germinate because they have quite a hard casing on them. So I have a little trick, which is snipping one end of the seed with some nail clippers. So I snip a tiny bit off the round end, and then I fold it in some kitchen roll, and then I soak that kitchen roll in some room temperature water before popping it in a pot and into a plastic bag. And then I'll always leave room for air to flow in and out, and then I'll keep that somewhere dark but somewhere warm, and germination should happen within a few days. They are vines, so they will need something to climb up, but in a few months, at the end of summer, I should have some large loofah gourds to then peel and shake out all of the seeds, and I will get some homegrown sponges. My loofah sponges are perfect for scrubbing the dishes. I also turned some into gifts, and I made them into soaps as Christmas presents last year for friends and family. So it's just another idea for using these amazing homegrown loofah sponges.
Is that comfy? Is that where you want to be? No. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I seem to remember that when I was a child, ages ago, there was a loofah in every bathroom, sometimes a bit manky and old, and you used it for scrubbing your back, because you could put your fingers in the three holes and reach down. But I like the idea of cutting them up and using them as a kind of scouring pad, or filling them with soap. That's something that certainly I'd never thought of. And I have tried growing them without a lot of success, so maybe I should try again. I've come here to clean up these carnivorous plants, the Sarracenia. And although they look very exotic and special, in fact they are pretty tough. And the thing to do at this time of year is to cut off all the growth that is dying back. So go right back to the base and cut them off, and you'll find that they're leathery and tough. And by doing that, you will encourage new growth to come through, which actually comes very quickly. And don't worry, even if you cut the whole thing back, because they will regrow. I've had these for about 6 years now, and I've only ever repotted them once. And they are one of those plants that absolutely need an ericaceous compost, which traditionally was always peat, but they don't need peat, and none of us should be using peat in our gardens now, because the harm and the damage we do to peat bogs is so great. And in fact, this is a subject that we will be looking at in much more detail in the weeks to come. And I use a mixture of leaf mould and a bracken-based compost, mixed 50-50, and these are completely happy. I think the main thing about carnivorous plants, or certainly most of them, is that they really are much tougher than many people might think. I keep them mainly in the greenhouse, but not because they need to be in the greenhouse, but because that's where they catch most flies. And I think that's true of a lot of plants. We tend to sort of rather worry that the weather is going to be too tricky. Whereas with some careful placing and a little bit of protection, it is extraordinary what you can grow in the most unlikely of places. And a really good example of that is found in the garden of Dolly Charles, which is in mid-Wales, not so very far from here. And it's worth having another look at it to see what's possible with a little bit of adventure, inspiration and skill.
When I come in my garden, I escape to another place. I feel a sense of peace, tranquility, and happiness. Seeing the sunlight filtering all through the leaves and the light breeze and the sounds of the birds singing is like a paradise to me. I grew up in Jamaica, West Indies, in East Portland, up in Scotland. Creating a garden like this remind me of home. You take me back to my childhood, walking down a hill and seeing the sunrise coming up, seeing the sea and all the ponciana and the bloom and the flowers and everything just bursting out. I came over in 1976 after I just got married, and I looked at my husband and I went, oh my God, he's freezing, yeah? Sorry. I said to him, where are the tropical plants? Oh, the house looked grey. I said, where is no river? Where I can't stay here. Sorry. My children left home. They grew up and left home. I miss them. I miss them terrible. And once missed them, I start thinking about home again. So I started a garden and I joined Newtown Gardening Club. And those were the days you get 50p plants, so you get swap. And I started to build on it slowly. From ever since, I just keep on with the garden. The plants in itself, I don't just plant. I visualize where they're going to be because I try to bring back the memory of what I've actually seen as a child. And even now, I can visualize the pathway down the river, the leaves, the trees, the brooks, the fruits, everything is just clear, still in my head. You wouldn't believe how I get this plant. I visit a place, Hunt Avenue in Newtown, and it was growing on a bank. I said to the caretaker, you mind if I had a bit of cutting of that plant? And she said, why do you ask? I said, it reminds me of home, this very tropical looking. And then she gave me a cuttings, and from the cuttings, this is how I have this. It's been here now 3 years, and every year I come out, and it just reminds me walking down through the bush in Jamaica. Here in Wales, the climate is one of my drawbacks, and I learned there must be a way of getting foliage, colour. And I noticed that some of the plants were the same, so I find a lookalike plant that can withstand the harsh winter, like the rice plant, the japonica, and the hardy palms, which has got leaves looking like coconut trees. This is another plant of my lookalike tropical plants, named Palomia foxglove tree. It's a hardy perennial. It lost its leaf in the winter, but come back springtime. Some of these trees, they actually flower, but what I did is to cut back the plant in springtime to get the foliage, because the foliage is bring back memory of seeing a lot of trees with the big trumpet leaves or foliage growing in the tropics. I bought it about $3.99 a long time ago. I look for bargains in the shops. You don't have to keep on going out and buying a lot of small plants to make it look tropical. Few plants like this give a big impact to a small garden. I collect horse manure, but it's real rotten horse manure. And the banana, they love it. I started up on the hills, and my husband said, "You crazy going up there asking them for horse manure?" I said, "Well, the garden need it." My garden has been influenced by my grandmother was from the Arawak Indian Taino tribe. She get plants and ground it and make it into medication. My grand would go and say, "Go and pick this plant or that plant," and she will make it as a herbal tea. We live in the countryside up in the mountain, and there was no doctor. And as a premature baby, my grandmother used plants to help me to survive. So it gave me life. My grandmother used to like eating this plant. In Jamaica, we call it taro plant. But this one is called pink china. And the taro is like a tuber. And when the tuber is fit enough to be eaten, it contains a lot of carbohydrates and it gives you a lot of energy. It's very hardy. I left it out in the winter and it come back. My grandmother, one of the things was that she will not have her photograph taken because she believes that you take away her spirit. So a lot of things in the garden just remind me of my gran. This garden, it really gives me a sense of well-being, security, and how to survive in life. And my way of surviving is to have memories, and they're sweet memories.
It's interesting how powerful memory can be when you're creating your idealized place. And for all of us, our gardens are our idealized place. Here in the Paradise Garden, one of the key features are these tulips. This is Tulip acuminata. And you can see that it is extraordinary with these very long petals that are spidery and wispy, quite unlike most tulips. And they're so elegant. Still to come on today's programme. Nick visits Ham House, where they're looking at some novel ways to control box tree caterpillar.
This one smells of basically caterpillar excrement. Fancy a sniff?
OK, let's give it a go.
And I will be planting a long-term alternative. Clearly, the central thing to making any garden is to provide something that you need. And that's always going to be personal. And that's very clear in this film that we've been sent from a viewer from Warwickshire.
I'm Gary. I live in Warwickshire and I've been a gardener all my working life. But whilst at work I'm used to acres of wildflower meadows, planting trees and growing all sorts of fruit and flowers. At home, my gardening is on a more humble scale and I'm happiest just pottering or with my head in a good gardening book. We've been here 5 years in this rented property, so it's also worth saying that there are restrictions to what I can realistically achieve. Having said that, I personally focus on making this garden as useful and interesting as I possibly can. And as you might expect, I dabble with container gardening, where I like to grow prize finds from a local nursery, or a few salad or vegetable plants, like strawberries in an old bucket, for example. As I see it, the beauty of containers is that they are a movable feast, often moved just to make the best of the available light. Containers in all their many forms offer me flexibility and give opportunity to be creative using plants that need different growing requirements, for example. And containers always fit nicely into a corner, and I find you can never run out of corners in a small garden. Above all though, this garden is important to me because it's a place where my family can continue to grow and connect with nature. And it's a place where I myself can unwind, ponder, garden at my pace, and just be myself.
I think that is the essence of what we love most about a garden. It's somewhere where you can be at peace and be yourself. It's your space. And the fact that you're creating it and you're doing it is empowering. Well, what I'm doing now is preparing to plant a yew hedge. But planting yew hedges is really special because a yew hedge can live for hundreds and hundreds of years. We know that yew is one of the oldest living things on this planet. And if you're looking for a replacement for box, don't pass yew over. We tend to think of it as a great big hedge. It doesn't need to be. 2 to 3 foot tall is a good size for yew, and it keeps clipped and nice and dense, and of course evergreen. Right, I am planting cuttings. Cuttings that we started to make about 6 years ago, and they're not difficult. They strike really quite well, and yew is not the slow-growing plant that people think it is. For the first 10 to 30 years, it grows quite vigorously. Now, I have dug this over thoroughly, both to weed it and also to get rid of any compaction. Yew is very adaptable. It's happiest on well-drained alkaline soil like chalk or limestone, but it will grow practically anywhere as long as it has good drainage. The thing that yew hates most of all is being waterlogged. When you're planting any hedge, put a string down so that you get it straight. And just to improve the drainage, what I will do is just slightly bring the soil up to the line. So you can see I'm creating a ridge that I can plant into. They're all slightly different shapes and sizes, and they will look a bit raggle-taggle initially, but then I will cut the tops of all of them, and that will encourage bushy side growth. Now I'm going to add some mycorrhizal powder, and what this does is foster an immediate fungal relationship with the roots of the plant and the soil. So I will just sprinkle that on. It's got to be in direct contact with the roots. Put that like that, and there we go. So it's very shallow planting. Now to get the distance right, and I need my spacing stick. Now, I don't want this to be 6 to 8 foot tall. I intend to keep it 2 to 3 foot tall. So therefore I don't need such big plants, but I do want them to be compact and healthy. So I've cut a stick here, which is about the right. This is about 18 inches. It's a little bit longer. So you just put it on the center, not from the edge of the growth, but the center of the stem, and put that there, and that's where the next one goes. Now, yew is poisonous to livestock. And if you have a puppy that chews on yew, then you should take it out of their mouth. And all our dogs have done that at some stage or other. One more to do. I will stake each of these with a bamboo stake just until their roots get established, which will be for a couple of years. And it's not a bad idea when you're planting a young hedge of any kind to stake them all. Now, just because I've planted those very shallowly on a ridge, and just because they need good drainage, don't assume that they don't need plenty of water. When I've planted them all, I will give them a really good soak, and I will continue to water them, unless it's wet, every week for the rest of this year. Yews do need moisture, particularly when they're young, but it must drain away. Now, it's worth remembering that I'm planting these yews in the first place because our box hedges, which I loved when they were in their prime, proved to be hopelessly riddled with box blight, and we grubbed them all out earlier this year and burnt them. However, in London and the southeast, box tree caterpillar has arguably become a bigger problem than blight. So it seems to me a good moment to revisit Ham House with Nick, where they are trying different ways of tackling the problem of box tree caterpillar.
Commonly known as box, Buxus is a true stalwart in British gardens. It's a versatile plant which can work in spaces both big and small, from large practical hedges through to 17th century inspired gardens like this one. But it's a plant that's seriously in the wars. First came box blight, which is a devastating fungus which causes the leaves to turn brown and the growing tips to shrivel. And then this arrived, the box tree caterpillar. And I, like so many other gardeners, know the absolute devastation this little beastie can cause. Box tree caterpillars are active from March to October. Female box moths lay their eggs on the underside of box leaves, and once these hatch, the caterpillars rapidly feed on leaves, often causing almost complete defoliation of the plant. Today, it's one of the top garden pests in the UK. One of many gardeners constantly battling it is Rosie Files. Oh, Rosie, this is devastating.
It is, and we have not done one thing to this box to control the caterpillar in 2 years of having it. So what you see here is leaves that have been eaten and then some webbing. And where there is webbing, the caterpillar tends to be hiding in leaves.
I mean, it has an interesting life cycle, doesn't it? I think it's 3 times in a year it will regenerate.
Last year here 4. And I think that was to do with the hot weather. So you have to be vigilant, you have to be looking for the signs, and after a while you do get kind of used to crawling around your box and having a proper look, and we're very lucky, or not so lucky, to find one.
I mean, the devastation can be extraordinary. I first noticed it in 2014 in Chelsea. I was trying to hand pick them off, take them off the box plants. Are your team doing that? Is it worth it?
I think it's realistic in a domestic setting. If you've got a very prized area of box, it is a realistic thing to do. But bear in mind, you have to spot the signs of the caterpillar appearing first.
That tends to be about sort of May time?
Depends on the weather, but I think mid-May is a good time to start looking for the moth, and there are various tools that you can use to do that.
Rosie's chosen to leave the problem uncontrolled in the kitchen garden and plans to replace the box hedging here. In other areas, once caterpillars are sighted, they're targeted with a biological spray. To tackle the moth, she's using various methods with the help of Chris Poole, the chairman of the European Boxwood and Topiary Society. Tell me, Chris, what's your particular approach here to dealing with the problem? I know it's multi-stranded.
Yeah. First thing, though, is you need to know whether you've got the caterpillar or the moth. And let's start with the moth. To do that, you use one of these things, a pheromone trap, easily available online. And the pheromones come in a variety of different styles, sticky gels, or these new ones, which if I open this one up.
And so these would lure in the moth, it would get stuck and then tell you that they're present?
Yeah, basically it smells of lady moth, and the male moths will go for it. And this one lasts a whole season. From May through to October, that will keep the male moths coming for your trap.
So it's the females that are laying the eggs, which cause the caterpillars and the problem. So why are you trapping the males?
Yeah, females are laying around 700 eggs each. And why are we catching the males? Well, the males come out first from the eggs. And there are twice as many males as there are females, just to make sure the action happens.
So they really are the indication that the problem's about to occur?
Yeah.
Recently, Chris and his team have been trialling unique new ways to tackle box tree caterpillar, which could prove even more effective.
We were contacted by a German company who have a deterrent which should stop the female moths laying their eggs, and we've got some in the hedge here. In one of these pouches that is gas permeable, and this one smells of basically caterpillar excrement. Fancy a sniff?
Okay, let's give it a go. Okay.
It's actually
could
doesn't
be
smell.
worse.
It could be a lot worse.
Yeah.
We've got a different flavour, or in this case, really different smell, doing the same sort of thing of deterring the female moth.
Okay.
What does that
Try
one
it this
smell
time.
of?
It's very herby.
It is thyme. So what they found was that the female moths were repelled by the smell of thyme.
And this is the thymol that's in thyme, the sort of active compound.
Absolutely. And if you just grow thyme next to your box, I'm afraid that's not a strong enough concentration of it. This is much more concentrated, and it should, fingers crossed, deter the moths.
I mean, what's fascinating for me is obviously this is extracted or a concentrated form of thyme. And actually, thymol is a biocide, so it kills all living organisms, yet we manage to eat it somehow. In small doses, it doesn't hurt us. But fascinating that it can be used in this way. So this has got a distinctly nicer smell than the other product.
Certainly better than the poo.
Another method that could soon be available in the UK is the use of parasitic microwasps. They lay their eggs inside the egg sacs of a box moth. Once the wasp eggs hatch, they eat the eggs of the moth. So it breaks the life cycle.
It breaks the life cycle. Hopefully next year we'll get the licence in the UK to import these things from the Drôme region in France. They arrive in the post, and inside you'll have the microscopic wasps. Dead easy to use. Just hook it onto a branch of the box tree, and if you get the timing right, you should end up with no caterpillars.
Despite the devastating effect of this pest in the UK, the range of potential treatments means there's real hope for box in our gardens in the future.
They found at Ham House that the thymol has been pretty effective. And by using it, they are managing to contain the moth, not eradicate it, but just keep it under control so they can still keep their box hedging. They've stopped using the caterpillar poo because the smell was so offensive. But there is no doubt about it that box, which for so long was such an easy thing to grow, is now something you do want to think twice about before planting. Now, I sowed these peppers in the middle of March, hoping that as many of you as possible would sow them with me too. I've got two types. I've got Padron, which is essentially a green pepper that is not hot, or at least not usually hot, and the other is de Cayenne, which is hotter, but not blisteringly so, and both of them quite easy to grow. Now, if you sow them, you should have young plants with true leaves. You get 2 leaves initially, which come from the seed, then as they develop roots, you get more leaves which belong to the parent plant. And at that point, you need to prick them out and pot them up individually. Now, use a peat-free potting compost. I've added a bit of garden compost to it. Straight peat-free compost will do the trick. Hold the seedling by a leaf, and I'm using the label here just to tease out the roots with as much root ball as possible. Look at that, a cracking root ball. Really nice, strong young plant. Pop it in like that and drop some compost around it. Don't try and force it, because there's a real risk of damaging the roots if you do that. Just give it a shake. If it flops, don't worry, because when you water it, it'll go back upright. Now, we went down to West Dorset to visit a chilli grower who has been growing chilies commercially for at least 30 years and is a true expert.
There is no other vegetable that has such variety as a chili. The colour, the shape, the flavours. You can experiment, you can look, you can be wowed by them. They're just fun to grow, they're happy plants. My name is Joy Michaud, and I grow chilies and exotic vegetables in West Dorset on this slope overlooking the English Channel, which is a bit of a problem sometimes because we go up and down an awful lot, keeps us very fit. south facing the sea, so we get a lot of light reflected up from the sea, which is, for vegetable growing, is superb, and particularly for chilies. Chilies like a lot of light. I've been growing chilies for 30 years. We lived in the Caribbean for about 5 years when we sort of started learning about them. And then when we came back to Britain and we started growing chilies, and it went from there. Part of the fun of growing chilies is that they come from all over the world. We have chilies from almost every country you can think of. This is a poblano chili. It's from Mexico, very mild, really good tasting, but very mild. If anybody goes to Spain, they'll probably have the tapas dish called pimento de padron, and this is what the plant looks like. Now, for the tapas dish, they should be picked that size. Now, this is very immature, very young, very immature, and it doesn't have any heat. If they're picked a bit bigger or allowed to get a bit older, even if they stay small, they will get hot, which is why sometimes you will have a very hot one on your dish. They often say it's like Russian roulette. You never know when you're going to get that occasional hot chili. We've got the poblano and the padron, which look roughly like chilies, but then we also have another one here called wiri wiri. You see these beautiful round, pure round chilies. This is from Guyana, which is Central America. Now, this is a different species and it's got a different flavour and it's absolutely delicious. Very hot and really aromatic. So if you talk to anybody from Guyana and tell them that you've got a wiri wiri, their eyes go glassy. They just love this chili. If you're going to grow chilies, chilies are very easy to grow. The only difficult bit is the sowing, the germination. You want to sow in January, February or March. But they're from the tropics, they need that warmth. They need to germinate at around 27 degrees centigrade. So you need some external heat. If you haven't got a propagator, then find a place in your house near a radiator where it is going to be warmer. Then after that, lots of moisture because it's got to stay damp. You don't want it to dry out and it will germinate. As soon as it germinates, those plants need light. The sunniest windowsill you've got. Even then, I would recommend putting a mirror behind it or a board with aluminium foil because that reflects light back so you get light from both sides. Best way to tell how hot a chili is, the hottest bit is at the top where the main core is, and then the mildest bit is at the tip. A lot of people will taste see how hot a chili is, might nibble the tip. Doesn't tell you anything. It's going to be mild at the tip, even if it's a hot chili. So roughly about a third down from the stem is where the average heat level is. So to find out how hot it is, snap it there. Now snap it down to the ground, not towards your eyes. And there you've got the chili. Most of the pith is there, so that's where the heat is. Now, to see how hot it is, do not put it in your mouth. It might be really hot, and if it is, you're going to regret it. So what we do is touch it with your little finger, because you tend to rub your eyes more with your hand, with your main finger. So rub it like that, and then lick your little finger. If it's hot, you'll know straight away. If it's not very hot, it takes a while, but at least you've got some concept of how hot that chili is. Then you've got a better idea of how to use it and how to cook with it. An interesting fact about chilies is that it's only mammals that get that mouthburn when they eat them. So birds can eat them without any ill effects, and then the seeds pass through without being damaged, and of course they spread the seeds all over the place. Mammals, if they eat a chili, they'll destroy the seeds. Now, we have a problem with mice on our nursery. We've got a population of mice that love our chilies, but they are mammals, so they are getting that mouthburn with every chili they eat. They've obviously learnt to like them. There are some chilies which are extremely hot. We call them super hots, and these are unbelievable heat levels. When I'm extracting seeds from them, I wear gloves, double gloves, and I'll change them every 10-15 minutes because the juice will go straight through, and then it really does hurt if it gets on your skin. Here we have chilies from all over the world, and some of them are very hot, but if you want real heat, you have to come to Dorset. There was a chili from Bangladesh called Naga Moorish, and it was extremely hot. There was no seed available, so we had to get the seeds from Bangladeshi shops, and we got them to grow. After about 8 years, we had what was turned out to be a very uniform crop each time, and that's when we called it Dorset Naga. So at that point we thought, well, we better see how hot it is. There was nowhere in Britain at the time to get chilies tested. So we sent it off to the States, and a little while later we got a phone call back from this person who'd been testing chilies all his life. He had never tested a chili that hot before. This was way hotter than the Guinness World Record holder at the time, and that was at 577,000 SHUs, Scoville heat units. This one was close to 1 million. It was picked up by the national papers, the international newspapers, and that went out on the 1st of April. And so we got so many phone calls that day, all over the world. Is this an April Fool's joke? Because this was happening in West Dorset, the hottest chili in the world, in West Dorset. But it was true. Growing plants is good for the soul. It makes you feel good. You give to them, you get your hands dirty, you create something, and the plant gives something back to you. There can be nothing more satisfying in the world than growing a plant and then being able to pick it and eat it, take it, bring it into the house and feed your family with it. It gives you satisfaction, it gives you joy.
It's not just growing chilies that is a joy and good for you. Eating them is too. I love them anyway, but they're good for you. It's been shown that chilies raise your serotonin levels, which is good for your well-being. Now, quite a few people have commented on the fact that I planted out these sweet peas rather early, and that the weather of the first part of this month, with the hail and frost and snow, showed that that was a mistake and will have harmed them, if not killed them. Well, none of that's true. They're fine. Sweet peas are much tougher than you think, and I haven't closhed them or fleeced them in any way at all. Now, talking of cloches, I've got cloches that I've had for 20 years, and they're doing a good job over the asparagus now. But they can be quite pricey. However, Alpha All Free from Colwell in Malvern has sent us a film showing that you can have cloches without spending a fortune.
Hello. I decided this year that I needed some cloches to protect my vegetables. I looked at various options and I was quite appalled by how much they cost. Anyway, I went to the local DIY store and bought a piece of corrugated plastic. And then I have carefully drilled holes all along there. And into the holes, I'm going to insert a metal rod. And I've made this former, so all I need to do is to bend this round, like so. And then I have made one of the legs that will go into the plastic to make the cloche. I then thread the plastic over the legs. I've done one at the other side. And then just work the plastic over, and lo and behold, I have a cloche. And here are the cloche in use in the garden. The right-hand one has got radishes underneath and they've germinated nicely, and the left-hand one has got beetroot. So I have managed to make 4 cloches for £6.20 each, which I thought was pretty good.
I think that's pretty good too. And there's no question that making something yourself is immensely rewarding. And if you can save money while you're about it, well, so much the better. I'm just tying up the clematis here in the Jewel Garden. In the Jewel Garden, we mainly grow the late flowering clematis. And these start to flower in June or even early July and will go on into October. And they produce all their flowers on new shoots. So we prune back everything in late February, early March, and they're just beginning to produce new growth. And it's actually been quite cold, so they haven't grown too much. But as soon as it warms up, the new growth is really vigorous and needs tying in. Now, from about mid-May, they actually develop tendrils that cling themselves. But this is a job I do every week until the middle or the end of May, and just go around and tie in all that loose growth. Now, while I'm doing this, here's some jobs for you to get on with this weekend. The secret of good plant support is to put it in place before it is needed. If you leave putting in plant supports until plants collapse, it'll never look good. Put it in place now, and it will very quickly be hidden by new growth and will do its job without anyone noticing. It's not too late to plant shallots or onion sets out direct. But if, like me, the ground was too cold a few weeks ago, so you put them into plugs, they will now have strong shoots and roots. So they can be put into the ground, spaced either in a grid or in rows about 9 inches apart. And very quickly, they will establish as strong plants that will produce lots of new shallots. Cosmos are tender annuals, so it's a little cold to plant them out yet. To keep them growing strongly, prick out the seedlings that you sowed earlier into individual modules or small pots. Water them and put them somewhere warm where they can be grown on, so that you have nice, strong plants to plant out after the risk of frost has passed. Although the very cold weather we had for the first few weeks of this month were not much fun for gardeners, it's been surprisingly benign for the garden. Very little has been damaged, and some things I think have actually been improved. For example, this fabulous great white cherry, Tai Haiku, has blossomed for much longer this year than normal because heat means that it goes over very quickly, wind and rain bashes it about, but actually calm, cold weather doesn't seem to harm it too much at all. And the garden is just moving on into spring despite the weather. It can't be stopped. But I'm afraid today's programme will be stopped. That's it for today. We've run out of time. But I will see you back here at Longmeadow next Friday. So until then, bye-bye.